resurrection truth, the anchor of my belief, the resurrection challenge. Do you believe in the resurrection of Jesus? If not, you are on death row. Why is it important to believe in the resurrection of Jesus? Here is what the word says in 1 Corinthians 15, verse 14. And if Christ has not been raised, our preaching is useless, and so is your faith. And again in 1 Corinthians 15, 17. And if Christ has not been raised, your faith is futile. You are still in your sins. And again in Romans 10, 9. The word says, if you declare with your mouth, Jesus is Lord, and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. So we need to believe in the resurrection of Jesus to be saved. Without believing in the resurrection, our faith is dead and we cannot be saved. So in this session, we are going to explore these questions and issues. Who is Jesus? Is he God? To answer these questions, we will look at two things. Firstly, his life here on earth. Secondly, his death and resurrection. Did he truly resurrect from the dead? We'll try and answer those questions. So, in his life, Jesus did contradictory things that pointed to his deity, that he was God. According to the Bible, Jesus is a highly controversial, mad, foolish, and a blasphemous great prophet, great teacher with great divine powers, as demonstrated by his miracles and his incredible ability to see into the future with pinpoint accuracy. So, when we look at the Bible, according to the Bible, we are saying he is mad and a blasphemous individual. For he said things which only a madman would say. 1. Teaching centered on himself. If you look at John chapter 14, verse 9, this is what Jesus says. Jesus answered, don't you know me, Philip, even after I've been among you such a long time? Anyone who has seen me has seen the Father. How can you say, show us the Father? So he is claiming, centering things on himself and saying he is actually the Father. If you see the Father, you've seen him. This was teaching centered on himself. And you can also go through to John 6:35, John 8:36, and many other verses. The one that I like most is John 14:6, where he says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through him. That is Jesus. Through me. That is Jesus. So technically what he's saying there, that's a very contradictory statement. He's saying no other religion, no other way except through him. So he's challenging every other religion. That's difficult to accept. And then 2, he made indirect claims of being God. He claimed that he could forgive sin. And we know that only God forgives sin. And we find this in Mark 2, verse 5. And it reads, when Jesus saw their faith, he said to the paralyzed man, son, your sins are forgiven. And also, he also made indirect claims that he is going to judge the world. That is indirectly claiming to be God. So if you go to Matthew chapter 25, verses 31 to 32, he says, when the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels with him, he will sit on his glorious throne. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate people one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. So technically he's saying he's going to be judging. He's going to decide who goes to hell and who goes to heaven. Worse than this, he made direct claims of being God. If you go to John 10, verse 30, he says, I and the Father are one. He's technically saying him and God are the same person. And if you go to John 20, verse 26 to 29, when he came back for the second time and he showed himself to Thomas, Thomas then ended up saying, my Lord and my God. And Jesus didn't stop him. He just said, now that you believe, blessed are those who believe without seeing. He didn't say, Thomas, no, I'm not God. Yeah. So he is again directly claiming to be God. No wonder why many of them, which are the Jews, they said in John chapter 10, verse 20, he is demon possessed and raving mad. Why listen to him? You know, and even his own family was convinced that he was out of his mind. We find this in Mark 3:21. It reads, when his family heard about this, they went to take charge of him, for they said he is out of his mind. They were saying he is beside his mind, that he had lost his mind. So just imagine, you are James, the brother of Jesus, and your half-brother just wakes up one day and is claiming to be God in a Jewish community. Such blasphemy. And we move on. We also look at, according to human standards, he was foolish. For example, how can the Messiah ride on a donkey to enter Jerusalem, to face the Roman Empire? We see this in John 12:14 to 16. And it reads, Jesus found a young donkey and sat on it. As it is written, do not be afraid, daughter Zion. See, your king is coming, seated on a donkey's colt. The initial reaction of the disciples proved that this was a foolish thing to do. And you see that in verse 16, and it reads, at first his disciples did not understand all this. Only after Jesus was glorified did they realize that these things had been written about him and that these things had been done to him. Also, when we look at his strategy to draw all men to himself, this strategy says he has to be nailed to the cross to draw all men to himself. So from a human point of view, that is foolish. How can you draw all men to yourself by being nailed to the cross? And we find this in John 12, verse 32 to 34. And it reads, and I, when I am lifted up from the earth, will draw all men to myself. He said this to show the kind of death he was going to die. The crowd spoke up. We've heard from the law that the Messiah will remain forever. So how can you say the Son of Man must be lifted up? Who is this Son of Man? So the crowd was actually even confused. So we see from all these things that we've said above, that Jesus' life was very contradictory, and some people in the Bible called him mad, and we've shown the verses that point to these facts. But here are three mysteries about this mad, foolish, and blasphemous man. 1. This mad, foolish, and blasphemous man was a great prophet. Here is what Luke 7:16 says. They were all filled with awe and praised God. A great prophet has appeared among us, they said. God has come to help his people. This was after he had raised to life the son of the widow of Nain, which is in Luke 7:14 and 15. Again, this mad, foolish, and blasphemous man was a great teacher. And we find this in John 7, verses 14 to 15. And it reads, and these are the Jews, the Jewish leaders who are saying this. Not until halfway through the festival, did Jesus go up to the temple courts and begin to teach? The Jews were amazed and asked, how did this man get such learning without having been taught? And B, this mad, foolish, and blasphemous man performed great miracles. The life of this man was full of demonstration of divine power. This mad, foolish, and blasphemous man healed every kind of disease. Luke 4:40 says, at sunset, the people brought to Jesus all who had various kinds of sickness, and laying hands on each one of them, he healed them. This mad, foolish, and blasphemous man opened the eyes of men born blind. We see this in John 9:15. This mad, foolish, and blasphemous man had the power over demons. See Matthew 8:16. Even demons testified that he is the Son of God. Matthew 8, verses 28 to 29. This mad, foolish, and blasphemous man stilled the storms. Mark 4, 39 to 41. He walked on the water. This mad, foolish, and blasphemous man raised the people from the dead. The daughter of Jairus, the synagogue ruler, the son of the widow of Nain. This mad and foolish blasphemous man called Lazarus from the grave after 4 days, when Lazarus' body was in an advanced state of decomposition. We see this in John 11:43 to 44. And it reads, when he had said this, Jesus called in a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen, and a cloth around his face. And see, this mad, foolish, and blasphemous man could see into the future with pinpoint accuracy. He predicted in advance the exact details of the events of what will happen just before his death. He predicted his betrayal, John 13:21, and predicted who would betray him, John 13:26. He predicted that all of them, his disciples, would leave him alone as they ran away for their lives, John 16:32. And it happened just as he had predicted, as we read in Mark 14, verses 50 to 52. And it reads, then everyone deserted him and fled. He also predicted the exact details of Peter's denial in Mark 14:30. And it says, truly I tell you, Jesus answered, today, yes, tonight, before the rooster crows twice, you yourself will disown me 3 times. And it happened exactly to the point, as we see in Mark 14:72a. Immediately the rooster crowed the second time. Then Peter remembered the word Jesus had spoken to him. Before the rooster crows twice, you will disown me 3 times. And then he broke down and wept. At this point, can I leave it to you to judge for yourself? Given the above, do you think Jesus was just a mad, foolish, and blasphemous man, or he is who he claimed to be, God? If your answer is, he was and is God, then everything he said is true. Provided, of course, his disciples were not lying about all these miracles and the ability to see into the future. So, how do we know that the testimony of his disciples, the testimony of the disciples about Jesus is true? To remove these doubts, Jesus gave us another dual prediction during his life, which, if it happened, and we can prove that it happened, it will put an end to all these doubts. The dual prediction was that he said he will be killed, and on the 3rd day, he will rise again from the dead. So let's look at this resurrection challenge, which I call the final proof. Was he just another mad, foolish, and blasphemous man? Or he was who he said he was? So let's look at this, if this happened. So firstly, we look at the first part of that Joel prediction. Again, we're saying this mad, foolish, and blasphemous man predicted that he will be killed and rise from the dead on the third day. We see this in Luke 9:22 and Luke 18:31 to 34. True to the first part of his Joel prediction. The first part of his Joel prediction happened. He was killed. And why? Because Jesus blasphemed right before the high priest by making a direct claim, again, that he is God. We see this in Mark 14, verses 61 to 65. And it reads, "But Jesus remained silent and gave no answer. Again the high priest asked him, 'Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One?' 'I am,' said Jesus. 'And you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds.' The high priest tore his clothes. 'Why do we need any more witnesses?' he asked. 'You have heard the blasphemy. What do you think?' They all condemned him as worthy of death. Then some began to spit at him. They blindfolded him, struck him with their fists, and said, 'Prophesy.' The guards took him and beat him. Why did the high priest tear his clothes? It is clear that in these verses, Jesus was claiming directly to be God. We see in Psalm 68:4, which reads, "Sing to God, sing in praise of his name, extol him who rides on the clouds, rejoice before him, his name is the Lord." So it is clear from this verse that only God rides on the cloud, and Jesus is claiming that he will be seen coming riding on the clouds. Also, by stating that he is the Son of Man who will come riding on the cloud, Jesus was claiming that he is the one who was prophesied by the prophet Daniel, which again was a direct claim of being God, as stated by prophet Daniel in Daniel 7, verses 13 to 14. And it reads, "In my vision at night I looked, and there before me was one like a son of man, coming with the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days and was led into his presence. He was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All nations and peoples of every language worshipped him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed." So you see, by claiming this, being the Son of Man in the book of Daniel, Jesus is actually saying he's the one who has been given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All nations and peoples of every language will worship him. In which the term Son of Man will be worshipped. And only God is sovereign and is to be worshipped. So he is claiming to be God. By stating that you shall see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of God is a declaration of equality with God the Father. The high priest got the message loud and clear, so the Sanhedrin plotted his death, which led to them handing him over to Pilate, fulfilling what Jesus had predicted earlier in Luke 18:32. And it reads, "He will be delivered over to the Gentiles. They will mock him, insult him, and spit on him." Then we see who Pilate then crucified, as stated in John 19:17 and 18, and I read, carrying his own cross, he went out to the place of the skull, which in Aramaic is called Golgotha. There they crucified him, and with him 2 others, one on each side and Jesus in the middle. Pilate had a notice prepared and fastened to the cross. It read, Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. Now, he was dead. And the second part of his job prediction was that he would resurrect from the dead on the 3rd day, as we saw in Luke 18:33. And I read, open quote, they will flog him and kill him. On the 3rd day, he will rise again. This is what Jesus had said, predicted. The life and death question is, did it happen as he had predicted? Did he really rise from the dead? His disciples claim that he rose from the dead. Is it true? Do I believe that he resurrected? If I can answer yes to this question, moment by moment, the Bible will guide my life moment by moment, enabling me to remain in him. Why do we say so? 1, if he resurrected, then I would know for certain that he was not a mad, foolish, and blasphemous prophet, which means that what he said about himself in Mark 14, verses 61 to 62, where the Bible says, I am, said Jesus, and you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds, is true. It was not blasphemy. It is true he is God, as he claimed. This would then mean that everything he said is true. The whole Bible is true. The Old Testament is true. And points to him, as he said in Luke 24:44, and I read, he said to them, this is what I have told you while I was still with you. Everything must be fulfilled that is written about me in the law of Moses, the prophets, and the Psalms. Therefore, Matthew 6:33 is true. If we seek his righteousness and his kingdom, all these things that we run after will be given unto us. John 14:13 to 14 is true, where he says, if you pray in my name, I will do whatever you ask. It is also true that there is a place called hell, where the fire never quenches. So that then helps us to make the right decisions in this life. But if he did not resurrect as he had predicted, then I can conclude that he was just a foolish and blasphemous rebel. Just like Thaddeus and Judas, the failed rebels mentioned by Gamaliel in Acts chapter 5:35 to 39. And I read, this is what it says. When they heard this, they were furious and wanted to put them to death. But a Pharisee named Gamaliel, a teacher of the law, who was honored by all the people, stood up in the Sanhedrin and ordered that the men be put outside for a while. Then he addressed the Sanhedrin, men of Israel, consider carefully what you intend to do to this man. Some time ago, Thaddeus appeared claiming to be somebody, and about 400 men rallied behind him. He was killed, and all his followers were dispersed, and it came to nothing. Therefore, in the present case, I advise you, leave these men alone. Let them go. For if their purpose or activity is of human origin, it will fail. But if it is from God, you will not be able to stop these men. You will only find yourselves fighting against God. It will also mean, if he didn't rise, that Christianity as we know it was just another lie, and it will cease to exist, as 1 Corinthians 15, 14, and 17 states, as we said before. And I read 1 Corinthians 15, 14. And if Christ has not been raised, our preaching is useless, and so is your faith. So, which was which for me and for you, maybe? Did he rise from the dead, on the third day, as he predicted? Do I believe that Jesus rose from the dead as he had predicted? If I'm a Christian and say I believe in Jesus, am I convicted of the resurrection truth? How I answer this question on a daily basis will determine whether or not the Bible will shape my life decisions moment by moment. As I researched further, I came to a solid conclusion that, true to his word, he rose from the dead on the third day, as he had predicted. Here are the facts I discovered, or that were revealed to me, to prove it, as stated in Acts 1:3, which says that he proved it to them by showing them infallible proofs that he had risen.